Consciousness is a controversial topic and also the most comprehensive in the sense that it includes or covers in it almost every other topic of interest in spirituality and philosophy. Philosophers and scientists differ in discussing consciousness not only as two opposing camps, they differ even among themselves. Jiddu Krishnamurti takes a radically different approach and clearly rejects the presupposing of any superconsciousness or any classification of consciousness. There is no guarantee that emptying the content of consciousness will land you in any super or higher state. We just don't know. If you hallucinate or imagine any kind of higher state, it is still within the realm of thought, then obviously you have not emptied your consciousness that is put together there by thought. I was hoping that I could find a speech or a writing of Alan Watts that favors or talks about Kay's approach, but did not find one. Maybe I did not look hard enough. So I have to be content with what Alan has to say about the Hindu philosophy of consciousness and his elaboration of it with his usual eloquence. In the process of explaining consciousness, he talks about the narrow windows of perception in which our ordinary everyday consciousness is operating and the relativistic nature of time and space. Sadhguru speaks of the consciousness, Turiya, or the fourth state of consciousness, which is beyond memory and which underlies and pervades the other three forms of consciousness. This is exactly as stated in the Hindu philosophy, namely Upanishad. While expounding consciousness in his own metaphorical and humorous way, he touches upon and gives clarity to few other concepts such as memory, free will, and karma. Rejoice in your consciousness.
I believe I'm a Hindu with all these Brahmanical superstitions, with their rituals, with their absurdities, with their gods, with their beliefs in this and that and the other thing. That is the consciousness of a Hindu born in their country. In the West, the consciousness is the content. The Christian, the Savior, the whole hierarchical system. The soul, the Redeemer, the original sin, and so on, so on, so on, so on. If you are a communist, you will say, according to Marx, environment, which is economy, has shaped your consciousness. And there are those people who say you can't change it. You can modify it. You can polish it up. But you have to accept it. Make the best of it, but it's there. You follow all this? And, as we said, the content makes its consciousness. Without the content, consciousness as we know it doesn't exist, obviously.
But still, just as you don't notice what your pineal gland, say, is doing at the moment, So in the same way, you don't notice the connections which tie us all together, not only here and now, but forever and ever and ever and ever. The difficulty and the basic reason why we don't notice the self is that the self doesn't need to look at itself. A knife doesn't need to cut itself. Fire doesn't need to burn itself. Water doesn't need to quench itself. And a light doesn't need to shine on itself. So this is the fundamental problem of having some sort of awareness of the self. Nevertheless, it is the whole contention of Indian philosophy, especially what we call Vedanta, that it is possible, in a certain way, to become aware of oneself in this deepest sense, to know that you are the totality. And this experience is the real substance of Indian philosophy as a whole, both Hindu and Buddhist. It is called moksha, which roughly means liberation. Liberation from the hallucination that you are just poor little me.
Essentially, in the yogic sciences, we are looking at consciousness as an intelligence beyond memory. If there is memory, memory is considered a boundary in the sense, this is one person, this is another person, simply because this embodies one kind of memory and that embodies another kind of memory. This has become one kind of person, this has become another kind of person. Essentially, it is in the memory. Memory does not mean just what I remember and you remember. Genetic memory is there, evolutionary memory is there, elemental memory is there, atomic memory is there, karmic memory is there. Inarticulate and articulate memories are there, but generally we are thinking memory means consciously what we can remember. But today, if we eat dog food, we'll not become dogs. Something within us remembers, no matter what you eat, this has to be only transformed into a human being. It doesn't matter what you eat. If you and a cow every day eat a mango, no merger will happen. Perfect memory is established, evolutionary memory is absolute. So, these different dimensions of memory are playing on a daily basis. People are thinking their thoughts are free. It's a joke because your memory is determining everything. So, largely in one single word we call this karma. Karma means the residual impact of all the memory that you have, how it is impacting every thought, every emotion, every action, the very way you sit and stand. See, if you see somebody walking far away, let's say half a mile away you see someone walking, if he's your friend, just the way they're moving their body, you say, oh, that's him.
What is our consciousness? To be conscious of, to be aware of what is going on, not only outside but also inside. It's the same movement. So, when we say we are conscious, we are aware, our consciousness is the product of society, right? Our education, our culture, racial inheritance, and the inheritance of one's own striving, the result. And our beliefs, our dogmas, our rituals, our concepts, our jealousies, anxieties, our pleasures, our so-called love, All that is our consciousness. Right? Right? That you cannot, nobody can dispute that. You can add more to it or expand it, but that is the structure which has evolved through millennia after millennia. Wars, tears, anxiety, sorrow, depression, elation, all that is part of us. Right? And the content, which is always make up our consciousness. Right? Right, sir? You're following this? I believe I'm a Hindu with all these Brahmanical superstitions, with their rituals, with their absurdities, with their gods, with their beliefs in this and that and the other thing. That is the consciousness of a Hindu born in their country. In the West, the consciousness is the content. The Christian, the Savior, the whole hierarchical system. The soul, the Redeemer, the original sin, and so on, so on, so on, so on. If you are a communist, you will say, according to Marx, environment, which is economy, has shaped your consciousness. And there are those people who say you can't change it. You can modify it. You can polish it up. But you have to accept it. Make the best of it, but it's there. You follow all this? And as we said, the content makes its consciousness. Without the content, consciousness as we know, it doesn't exist, obviously. If I have no belief, no dogma, no this and no that. And the question of says, is it possible to empty all the content? Do you understand? The sorrow, the strife, the struggle, the terrible human relationship with each other, the quarrels, the anxiety, jealousies, the affection, the sensuality, you follow? All that is our consciousness with its content. Can that content be emptied? And if it is emptied, is there a different kind of consciousness? And has consciousness different layers, different levels? In India, they have divided consciousness. Clever people they are, the ancient people, into lower, higher, higher, higher. I won't use the Sanskrit words and so on. It's divided. And this division is measurement. I don't know if you're following all this. Moment there is division, there must be measurement. Division between the Arab and the Jew, the Englishman, the Frenchman, is all measurement. And where there is measurement, there must be division and effort, wars, all the rest of it follow. Whether that consciousness has different levels, this consciousness is still within consciousness. I don't know if you follow it. It has been divided by thought, by clever people, by so-called people who have gone into this. It's been divided. That division is measurement, therefore it's thought. Whatever thought has put together is part of consciousness. Right? Whether you divide that consciousness as the higher supreme, it is still the movement of thought. Right? We agreed, we share, we are moving along together. Now the question is, can the content be emptied? Can sorrow be ended? Not only your personal sorrow, but the sorrow accumulated through millennia of mankind. The personal sorrow, I mean, the immediate sorrow. I've lost a son, I've lost this, or I'm not, the tears, the despair, which is momentary. But there is this vast sorrow of mankind, which has been accumulated through 5,000 or 10,000 years of wars, tribal divisions, tribal hatreds, the various aspects of religion, organized, not organized, those who believe, those who don't, and so on, so on, so on. Can all that be emptied? Must you take, please listen, must you take one by one and resolve them? You understand? Fear, conformity, pleasure, the nature of pleasure, the whole movement of pleasure, and sorrow. Can all that, will we take one by one and resolve these? That will take one's whole lifetime. I don't know if you're following all this. Or can one have a total insight into all that? You understood? We have explained what insight means. Not the insight of remembrance, not the insight of knowledge, time, and action. I wonder if you're following all this. I'm afraid you're not. Please don't meditate now. Don't go off into kind of this is very, very serious because it affects your life. And we say it is possible to empty this content completely. The essence of this content is thought which has put together the me. The me, which is ambitious, the greedy, aggressive, all that. That is the essence of the content of consciousness. Can that me, with all this, structure, selfishness, all that, can that be totally ended? The speaker could say yes, it can be ended. Completely. which means no center from which you are acting, no center from which you are thinking. The center is the essence of measurement, which is the becoming. Can that becoming end? And we say probably it can, but what is at the end of it? You understand? That is, if I end this becoming, what is then being? I wonder if you follow this. First of all, find out for your own self if this becoming can end. Can you drop end something that you like, that gives you some deep pleasure, without a motive, without saying, I can do it if there is something at the end of it? Can you do something immediately and something that gives you great pleasure? See how difficult this is? Like a man who smokes, his body has been poisoned by nicotine. And when he ends, the body is craving for it. And so you take something else to satisfy the body. So to give up to end something rational, clear, without any reward or punishment, just to say, finished. Selfishness hides in many, many ways. Seeking truth, social service, surrendering oneself to something, to a person, to an idea, to a concept. It also hides itself in social work, in devotion to nationalism, to God. Right? One must be so astonishingly aware of all this. And that requires energy. And that energy is now being wasted in conflict, in fear, in sorrow, in all the travails of life. That energy is being wasted in so-called meditation. And this requires enormous energy. Not physical energy, that's fairly easy. But the energy that has never been wasted. Then can go. Consciousness can be emptied. When it's empty, if there is something more or not, it's up to you. We like to be guaranteed that. There's no guarantee.
Now, the Hindus do say that the self, the great self, is consciousness. But of course that does not mean consciousness in the sense of our ordinary everyday consciousness. Ordinary everyday consciousness is indeed a form of this kind of consciousness, shall we say a manifestation of it. But then there's also consciousness which doesn't notice, but nevertheless is highly responsive. The way your heart beats, the way you breathe, the way you grow your hair, you're doing it, but you don't know how it's done. So therefore, just in the same way that conscious attention is not aware of all the other operations of the body, so in just that way, we are not aware of our connection, indeed our identity, with the fundamental self. When the leaves die and fall off the trees, or the fruit drops, next year, more leaves, more fruit. So in the same way, when you and I die, more babies later. If the whole human race dies, you bet your life, there are all kinds of things that feel that they're human, scattered throughout the multiplicity of galaxies. Because this universe is a peopling universe, just as an apple tree apples. But because we are unconscious of the intervals, we are not aware of the self with our conscious attention when conscious attention isn't operating. But still, just as you don't notice what your pineal gland, say, is doing at the moment, so in the same way, you don't notice the connections which tie us all together, not only here and now, but forever and ever and ever and ever. The difficulty and the basic reason why we don't notice the self is that the self doesn't need to look at itself. A knife doesn't need to cut itself. Fire doesn't need to burn itself. Water doesn't need to quench itself. And a light doesn't need to shine on itself. So this is the fundamental problem of having some sort of awareness of the self. Nevertheless, it is the whole contention of Indian philosophy, especially what we call Vedanta, that it is possible, in a certain way, to become aware of oneself in this deepest sense, to know that you are the totality. And this experience is the real substance of Indian philosophy as a whole, both Hindu and Buddhist. It is called moksha, which roughly means liberation. Liberation from the hallucination that you are just poor little me. To wake up from that kind of hypnosis and discover that you are simply something, your organism, your physical body, your conscious attention, which is your ego, that you are something being done by this vast, indescribable self, which is out of time, which has no beginning, no end, it neither continues nor discontinues. It's beyond all categorization whatsoever. And so the Upanishads say, all we can say of it positively is the negative. Neti, neti, it is not this, it is not that. Anything, therefore, you can formulate, imagine, picture, will not be the self. So when you are trying to know the self, you have to get rid of every idea in your head. It doesn't mean, as some people seem to think, that you have to get rid of every sense impression. It isn't as if you had to go into a catatonic state of total absorption. Of course, that can be done. But the full moksha, the full liberation, is when you come back out of absorption and see this everyday world just as it looks now, but see as clearly can be that it is all the self. You can become aware of this tremendous interconnectedness of everything. And that is what somebody who is moksha, who is liberated, sees. He sees, shall we say, that everything goes together. And that is, in a way, what we mean by relativity. Because relativity means relatedness. Just as fronts go with backs and tops with bottoms, insides with outsides, solids with spaces, so everything that there is goes together. And it makes no difference whether it lasts a long time or whether it lasts a short time. A galaxy goes together with all the universe just as much as a mosquito, which has a very short life. From the standpoint of the self, time is completely relative. You can have, if you scale it down, as much time between two of those very rapid drum beats as you can in eons and eons and eons. It's all a question of point of view, or, to use a scientific expression, level of magnification. Change your magnification and you see molecules. And we know by other methods of observation that it can get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that the spaces between these minute units are so vast that they're comparable to the distances between the sun and the planets in scale. So also with time. So in this sense, there could be vast, vast universes full of empires and battleships and palaces and brothels and restaurants and orchestras in the tip of your fingernail. And on the other hand, we could be all going on in the tip of somebody else's fingernail. It's very important to understand not only the relativity of size and of time, but also of what there is. Now, as you know, the human senses respond only to a very small band of the known spectrum of vibrations. We know through instruments of quite a vast spectrum, but we, as I say, with our senses, see only a little of it. If our senses were in some way altered, we would see a rather different-looking world. We can do this, of course. We can put on special lenses to enable us to see heat. And then we see all the heat radiations coming out of people. And we say, well, I never noticed that about you before. But so in the same way, you see, there are infinitely many possibilities of vibration and of organs sensitive to those vibrations, so that there could be worlds within worlds within worlds, spaces within spaces, just like the many, many wavelengths of radio and television, going on forever and ever in all directions. The possibilities are infinite. But having senses and noticing is a selective process. It picks out only certain ones, just as when you play the piano. You don't take both arms and slam down all keys at once. You select. And so perception is a kind of piano playing. It is picking out certain things as significant, that is to say, as constituting patterns. And the whole universe seems to be a process of playing with different patterns. But whatever it does, whatever it plays, in whatever dimension, on whatever scale of time or space, it's all on the self. The self is also known in Sanskrit as Brahman. This is a neuter word. Brahman is from the root BRH, br, which means to expand, to grow. It isn't quite clear exactly why this word was chosen. Sometimes there's a still better word for the self, which I like, is the word tat, almost like tit for tat. Tat means that. We get our word that from the Sanskrit tat. And so when the baby comes into being, first of all, the first thing it says is da, da. And the baby is pointing, da, da, da. And it's saying that. Look, isn't that marvelous? That, you see? So that is the witch than which there is no witcher. And so you get the formula in this Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Tat Tvam Asi, which means Tat, that, Tvam, Latin, you, Asi, are. You are that. Or that thou art. That art thou. So, in this sense then, every self is modeled on and is an expression of the one self, because you all feel individually that you're the center of the world. And everything else is seen in circles, circling out, sphering out from where you are. And that's, as it were, called the microcosm, the little cosmos. But then in the same way, the macrocosm has a central self, although this is not central in the way we talk about centers in space. Do you see that? A center of a circle is in the middle of the circle, and the circumference is away from it. But you could use a phrase that the Christian theologians have used of God, that circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. You could speak of Brahman that way. It isn't in the middle of the universe, spatially speaking. You might ask the question, where is the universe? Ever thought of that one? Where is it? Well, you can't say where, because everywhere has to be in relation to something. There would have to be another universe to say where this one is. But then, since those two together would constitute the universe, we wouldn't still be able to say where it was. It isn't anywhere. And so in that sense, the center isn't anywhere in space, locally. And furthermore, the kind of space we are dealing with is only one possible kind of space. It's the kind of space our physical organisms are attuned to. We are, you see, like the radio. We pick up what wavelength we're on.
So being wakeful and being conscious are two different things. This is described like this. For wakefulness, we have a word called Jagrati. Jagrati means you're awake. If 10 people, let's say we take a sample of 10 people, they all fell asleep, don't do it, okay? They all fell asleep and they came awake. When they come awake, all of them will not be equally awake. One person may be instantly awake, another person may take 2 minutes, as you have noticed with anesthesia also.
Sure.
Another person will take an hour to wake up, another person needs a strong coffee, otherwise she won't wake up. Am I right? Like this. Different levels of wakefulness is also there. Professors must have noticed.
Yes. In fact, the first few minutes of the day can be like that.
Different levels of wakefulness in a classroom. So, this is Jagrati. So, we are calling wakefulness as consciousness now. The next dimension of consciousness is called Swapna. This means a dream state. A dream state is far more vivid than wakeful state for most human beings. It's like going to a cinema. If you go to a cinema, the key factor of the impact of the cinema on you is turning off the lights. This is something most people don't understand. If you don't turn off the lights, cinema will be no good, it doesn't matter how well it's made. Turn on the lights and watch the cinema, you will see a great cinema becomes nothing. So turning off the lights is important. So turning off the lights in our experience is the eyelids, you down the shutters, the world is off. Now you start your own world. So dream state is like a cinema, it's far more impactful. People love their cinema stars more than the people that they've lived with for 25 years. But they have not even seen them, all they saw was play of light and sound. But that is far more impactful simply because lights are off. So, eyelid is that, if you roll it down, lights should be off, world should be closed. But right now, the problem is this mental faculty has not been taken charge of, so it's running wild all the time with eyes closed. So this dream state is considered a more powerful state than Jagriti. Jagriti or wakefulness is important for performing action in the world. But for human consciousness, in terms of profoundness of experience, dream is always more profound than walking on the street. Yes, most of you have experienced this. The next state is called as susupti. Susupti means it is a dreamless state. But there are dimensions of consciousness that you're aware of. It's a totally dreamless sleep state, but you're aware. There is no picturization, there is no video running in your mind, there are no pictures, there are no people, there are no words, but you're conscious in your sleep. This is a very powerful state. If you really want to manifest something in your life, this is something to be explored. And the next one is called as Turiya. This is consciousness, where there is no memory involved of any kind. Essentially in the yogic sciences, we are looking at consciousness as an intelligence beyond memory. If there is memory, memory is considered a boundary in the sense, this is one person, this is another person, simply because this embodies one kind of memory and that embodies another kind of memory. This has become one kind of person, this has become another kind of person. Essentially, it is in the memory. Memory does not mean just what I remember and you remember. Genetic memory is there, evolutionary memory is there, elemental memory is there, atomic memory is there, karmic memory is there. Inarticulate and articulate memories are there, but generally we are thinking memory means consciously what we can remember. But today, if we eat dog food, we'll not become dogs. Something within us remembers, no matter what you eat, this has to be only transformed into a human being. It doesn't matter what you eat. If you and a cow every day eat a mango, no merger will happen. Perfect memory is established, evolutionary memory is absolute. So, these different dimensions of memory are playing on a daily basis. People are thinking their thoughts are free. It's a joke because your memory is determining everything. So, largely in one single word we call this karma. Karma means the residual impact of all the memory that you have, how it is impacting every thought, every emotion, every action, the very way you sit and stand. See, if you see somebody walking far away, let's say half a mile away you see someone walking, if he's your friend, just the way they're moving their body, you say, oh, that's him. There are 7 billion plus people, but this particular man walks in a unique way, all right? Just two-leg walking, everybody walks, but still it is so unique. So this is what we are referring to as karma, that the residual impact of memory, varieties of memory. We recognize memory as 8 basic forms of memory, which are determining how you are right now. The very way you sit, stand, breathe, understand, perceive life is determined by this memory. But there is an intelligence beyond memory, which we call as Turiya or Chitta. This is consciousness. Now, every one of us is conscious. The question is only of degree. Even a rock is conscious, a dog is conscious, a pig is conscious. The question is only of degree, how conscious. Even among us, how conscious is different from person to person. So, this degree of consciousness determines everything. Now, if we have to give an analogy, what is memory is like, I'm sure every one of us at some stage in our life, I don't know if you're still doing it, we blew soap bubbles. Did you? Hello? Come on, everybody raise their hand for anesthesia. Did you? So, when you blow a soap bubble, the soap part of it, which is very little, just a tiny drop, the large part of it is air that it captures. So how big a bubble? When you were children, who can blow the biggest bubble was a big deal. And it's a certain amount of technique.
Yes.
How you do it. Somebody blew this big bubble, somebody got only this much. So how big a bubble? This bubble is like this, the kind of soap and how it gathers is your memory. It forms it gives it a form. But when the memory bursts, there is no such thing as your air and my air. There is no such thing as your consciousness and my consciousness. There is something called as your body and my body. There is something called as your memory and my memory. There is something called as your intellect and my intellect. But there is nothing called as your consciousness and my consciousness. How much of it did you capture? How big is your bubble will determine the scale of your life. The scale and possibilities of your life are determined by how big a bubble did you blow.